Welcome to Education 689. We are continuing our course with the lesson today, Teaching and Assessing. So again, we are using the Creativity in the Classroom as our textbook. Please see Moodle for all information about that textbook. So we're going to go ahead and establish our learning purpose and objectives for this lesson. We want to identify and analyze instructional tools to develop creative thinking, consider classroom shifts to promote problem finding and question formulation, and examine the rationale, methods, and challenges of assessing creativity. So the major assessment focus prompt for this lesson is apply divergent thinking strategies in the classroom. And so this is the one that your discussion board is going to focus on. And it also is the one that you're going to see revisited in your creativity project, which is the major assessment for this course. And the outcome, which I snipped straight from your syllabus, is the graduate student knows and can apply divergent thinking strategies in the classroom and is comfortable doing so. And so, of course, this is something that you will grow in your proficiency and your comfort level of, but it's something that I hope to provide you with many strategies and many examples in this particular lesson, not only through this lecture, but through your book as well and through the videos that I've linked, so that you can begin to see, number one, how you already may be doing some of these things, and you can just enhance it and you can be maybe a little bit more purposeful or strategic, but also to see maybe some new ideas that you haven't considered or you haven't implemented. And so that hopefully will raise your comfort level so that you can see how you can do it. So let's go ahead and jump in. Tools for creative thinking. So that's what we're going to be really focusing on today. And it's really what I want you to consider before we jump into a lot of the content. So practice with creative thinking skills does not automatically result in the transfer of such skills to other circumstances. And so what this is trying to say is it doesn't just mean like between disciplines, but it also means between different parts of our lives. We may be very creative in one area of our life, but maybe we don't know how to make that transfer to other areas. And I want you to consider that for yourself, and I want you also to consider that for your students. Sometimes we think of ourselves as being quote unquote like better in a certain area than others. And maybe we've just never been taught how to bring those creativity skills into that new environment. And this is the second point. Students must be taught how to use creativity tools, when to use them, and under what circumstances that they can be successful. So all research indicates that explicit instruction is necessary. So just like literacy skills and math skills, in order for us to build the creative thinking skills, students definitely benefit from being explicitly taught different strategies and how to use them. Instructional time spent developing creative and critical thinking skills actually sends the message to our student: creativity is valuable here. We care enough about it that we're going to actually make it part of our lessons. We're going to spend time talking about our creative thoughts, and you're going to be given time to actually pursue some of those creative thoughts. So when we spend time on it in the classroom, it sends the message that it matters. As you learn about instructional tools throughout this lesson to support students' creativity, consider which can fit most smoothly with your content and students' developmental level. So this is kind of your thinking question for today. And it's one that I challenge you as you move forward in the lesson. Consider which you feel like you could implement into your lesson. So first we want to talk about root Bernstein's, and that is not a punctuation error. This is a husband-wife team and a research team. And they have suggested that to improve education, we need to refine thinking. In an effort to identify creative thinking tools, the root Bernsteins examined the writings of a range of highly creative thinkers to find out how they experienced their processes. They identified 13 thinking tools of highly creative people. The tools are intended to bring together imagination and experience to help us understand the world in creative ways. So these are the 13, and I'm going to refer to page 261 and read a little bit more about each one of them. You can see the full list there as well and follow along. So observing is highly creative people pay attention to their senses. They are open to all the experiences of the body. Imaging, the ability to recall or imagine feelings or sensations, allows scientists or musicians both to recall past sensory experiences, but also to imagine sights, sounds, and feelings they've never experienced. So, for example, they can recall the bird's song, but then the song of thousands of birds and the feeling underneath a bird's wings are things that maybe they've never experienced, but they're able to because they have the imagination or the imaging to be able to do that. Abstracting. Because sensory input and imagery are complex, creative people use abstracting to extract core principles from complicated data, ideas, or images. Recognizing patterns as they occur in nature, in language, dance, or mathematics is the first step to being able to create them ourselves. Pattern forming is an important tool because creators combine elements in new and often unexpected ways. Analogizing, so the creation of analogies is a logical extension of recognizing and forming patterns. Creators recognize that two seemingly different things share important characteristics. This can lead to poetic images of life of a spider's web or the invention of a new pump based on the anatomy of a shellfish. Body thinking. Many highly creative people describe awareness that comes through the body before it enters their conscious mind. A dancer may experience a dance physically before consciously describing it, or a scientist or mathematician might have a sensation of the patterns of electrons or non-rational numbers that only later can be explained through logic. Empathizing is related to body thinking as individuals lose themselves in the things they study. Actors can lose themselves in roles, historians may seek to enter the minds of those they study, and scientists become one with the subject of their research. Dimensional thinking is a tool that individuals are able to envision objects in 3 or perhaps more dimensions. Of course, this type of thinking is essential to architects, sculptors, and engineers. Modeling. Although all of the earlier tools can be interrelated, the final 4 tools that we're going to talk about clearly require the integration of multiple tools. So modeling can range from modeling work on the accomplishments of others to using working models to understand and analogize situations. Playing requires a childlike joy in the endeavor at hand. It can entail approaching tasks with a level of irreverence that allows typical rules or procedures to be ignored momentarily. Transforming can move ideas from one form to another and or more from one thinking tool to the next to further explore and understand ideas. And finally, synthesizing is used to bring ideas, feelings, memories, images, and so on together in a holistic way. Whereas transforming may change things one step at a time, synthesizing makes a more singular change to bring important elements together. As you read the chapters this week and participate in the lesson, consider how the techniques described give students the opportunity to experience these tools. Next, consider in what ways using these tools might support students in building creative thinking skills. I've also included, if you'll look at the right, an interesting podcast with Robert Root Bernstein, in which he further discusses his research and his thoughts on creativity. It's really a fascinating podcast. It's the perfect sort of thing to kind of put on and put in the background as you're cooking, or maybe you're exercising, or maybe even as you're working on your creative pursuit. I think you'll enjoy it. So I added that. It really details not only these thinking tools that he discusses here and some of the research behind it, but also his own life as a creative, and his experience with creatives. So I think that you'll enjoy it. So now we're going to talk about problem finding, which is another tool. So Carson and Runco said that problem finding and problem solving skills were associated with more adaptive personal coping strategies and less linked with confrontation and avoidance in college students. So that's what their research findings were. 3 themes are related to problem solving: exploring with interest, playing and wondering, and capturing questions. So let's explore each of those. Exploring with interest entails approaching the world with wonder. Students can be taught the value of wandering, the physical exercise of seeking objects of curiosity, and wondering, the cognitive exercise of seeking concepts of curiosity. All content areas can be slightly tweaked to support moments of wandering and wondering. Consider ways we can physically take our students on trips that conjure curiosity. Sometimes this could even be within your own classroom. It's just looking at it a different way, maybe your own school. But even if we cannot physically visit, now with technology, we can virtually visit almost anywhere in the world. Instead of just asking our students, what do you see? We might ask, is there something here that puzzles you? What questions might we ask about this character, this soap bubble, this math puzzle? Additionally, allowing our students to explore questions that do not have one correct answer, one absolute truth, or an obvious answer stimulates the playing and wondering theme. Playing with ideas gives us the energy and impetus to ask new and interesting questions and provides a counterweight to the way too sophisticated to care attitude that seems to pervade youth culture. Provide opportunities for our students to capture their questions and their wonderings, which is the 3rd theme. Some types of strategies, such as journaling and brainstorming, provide structured activities for our students to channel their wonderings. Do we give them time to tinker with them through research projects, experiments, etc.? By providing opportunities for students to move through these 3 themes, we send the message that problem finding and solving, and sometimes not fully solving, is valuable and it's worth our time and our energy. The next tool that we want to talk about is students as questioners. So firstly, we want to talk about genuine questions versus checks for understanding. So less common is any effort to help students understand the difference between genuine questions and checks for understanding. Teachers ask a lot of questions to which they already know the answers. As teachers, we understand this is an important part of our formative assessment processes. We ask students to restate information, give examples, or solve problems as a way to determine how they understand content. The problem is, when we call these queries questions, and particularly if they are the only type of question that students experience in school, we teach an unintended message. Students come to believe that, at least in school, questions have one correct answer, and the teacher knows it. Their goal under such circumstances is to determine what the teacher is thinking and replicate that correct answer. Such interactions bear little resemblance to the roles that questioning plays in the real world, at least outside like game shows. So it's important for us to teach our students how to formulate genuine questions, questions that are beyond basic recall about our content, but more about what we mentioned above, the wondering of the content, the curiosity of the content. So we're going to talk about 3 different techniques here. The first is called the formulation technique, and that is by Rothstein and Santana. And this is, again, these 3 techniques are efforts to help our students create genuine questions of their own. So Rothstein and Santana had a journey into questioning that was actually very interesting. It's on page 270 of your textbook, and I highly recommend that you check it out. It was a 20-year journey in which they explored the role of questioning in a variety of venues. So the key to their recommendation is a protocol for question generation called QFT, or question formulation technique for short, QFT for short. Questions, of course, have many functions. In school, the QFT serves to support student engagement and learning by having them generate questions around a question focus provided by the teacher. That is not, what do you wonder about the world in general, but what do you wonder about this statement related to our core content? This is the strategy's greatest strengths and its biggest limitation. Having teachers provide the initial stimulus, if done well, means that the questions students generate should raise their curiosity and interest around areas planned for curriculum. This makes the process very school-friendly, while at the same time not being the optimum strategy for someone who wants students to generate individual questions about personal interests. However, it's a really great place to start with students, and it's actually very friendly to every type of curriculum and developmental level. So it's a great strategy. It has 3 stages: produce your own questions, improve your questions, and then prioritize your questions. It actually pairs really well with small group learning. So I definitely recommend that you check that out, page 270. The next technique is called a more beautiful question. So one of the books that actually pushed questioning is called A More Beautiful Question. And it was written by a researcher by the name of Berger. So essentially, Berger suggests a 3-stage progression in questioning: why, what if, and how. These categories envision the questioner looking at a situation and asking, why does it have to be this way? What if we could? How could we do it? This is a powerful sequence to teach questioners of any age. If you teach about invention or innovation, work with maker activities, or just want students to envision the work differently, Berger's book can actually be a really great resource. There's also a website as well for A More Beautiful Question. And then finally, we're going to talk about Myers' Habits of Mind. So Myers is actually also very user-friendly, the 5 Habits of Mind, and it's become really popular. I've actually seen some like programs and curriculum pieces about it. They're really, really effective. And this is definitely one that I've used in my own classroom with a lot of not just effectiveness, but efficiency with the way the students learn. So she cites 5 habits of mind that can be framed as a question. So the first is evidence. How do we know what we know, and what's the evidence? The next one is viewpoint. Could there be another point of view? The next one is connections or cause and effect. Do you see any patterns? Has this happened before? What are the possible consequences? The fourth one is conjecture. Could it have been otherwise? If even just one thing had happened differently, what might have changed? And then the final one is R for relevance. Does it matter? And who cares? And so these are some really great questions that you can actually give your students, and they can actually create more specific questions based on these patterns of the 5 habits of mind. So definitely check these out in your book. And I've also included a video at Wright to see how student questioning is purposefully used to engage, teach, and motivate learner creative and critical thinking. And as you pay attention to the video, notice the questioning technique that was used. You'll see that it's a combination of actually all 3 of these. And what's really fantastic is the students begin to question one another. which is one of the things that we want to see in those really creative collaborations. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the next tool, divergent thinking strategies. So divergent thinking, of course, is a buzzword in gifted education, and it is definitely part of what we know to be creative thinking skills, but sometimes we throw it around so much that we really may not know exactly what it means. So this is the definition that's many scholars agree on. They may phrase it a little bit differently, but unstructured, free-form way of problem solving in which participants produce many innovative ideas or solutions to a pressing problem. So divergent thinking sometimes is misunderstood, and it sometimes means like defiant thinking, and that is really not true. As we move forward in the course, we're going to talk a little bit more about convergent and divergent thinking, but we're just kind of laying the groundwork at this point for some of the teaching skills. But divergent thinking is essentially opening up to alternative types of thinking, alternative solutions, alternative products even that could potentially be produced. So divergent thinker, characteristics, all research is salient in these three characteristics: independent, curious, risk taker. So divergent thinkers have those three things in common. They're independent, they're curious, and they're risk takers. So the research consistently shows that students who are taught strategies to practice divergent thinking and are given context, such as time and environments in which to actually play around with this divergent thinking, they actually produce more creative ideas. And more here is kind of misleading. It's quantity and quality. So they actually come up with more, a greater number of creative ideas, and the ideas themselves are more creative. So research shows that divergent thinking strategies and divergent thinking time, building that into somewhere into our lesson planning, is important because it's not a waste of time. It's not just something fun. It actually leads to more creative ideas for our students. So we're going to talk about some strategies. The book actually mentions a lot more. These are mentioned in your book, and we're going to go ahead and talk about these now. But again, I recommend that you check out the chapter in your book that goes along with this particular section, because there are a lot more that you may find really meaningful for your content area or the appropriateness for your grade level. So the first is called the Talents Unlimited model. And it's direct teaching about divergent thinking, which we've mentioned that's important. And in this model, this type of thought called productive thinking is taught as one of several types that are important for success in a variety of tasks. Students are taught that when the task calls for productive thinking, they should do 4 things. They should think of many ideas. So that's the fluency factor. They should think of varied ideas. That's the flexibility factor. They should think of unusual ideas. That's the originality factor. And they should add to their ideas to make them better. That's the elaboration factor. So in addition to teaching the model, the Talents Unlimited model, instructors can encourage fluent, flexible, original, and elaborative thinking through their comments and their questions. For example, asking, how many ways can you think of to blank? Encourages fluency. What are some different kind of ideas? Or so far, all your ideas involve food. Try to think of ideas that solve the problem in a different way. That one encourages flexibility. Comments such as, try to think of something no one else will think of. Those are designed to elicit originality. And how can we build on this idea? That encourages elaboration. So even within a class discussion, we can implement the model to frame divergent thinking for our students. The next one that we're going to talk about is called brainstorming. And of all of the strategies, this one is perhaps the most familiar and maybe the most popular. It is based on the principle of deferred judgment that Osborne discussed in 1953, not evaluating any ideas until a number of them have been produced. Osborne compared the process to driving, noting that it is inefficient to drive while pushing on the gas and the brake pedal simultaneously. In a parallel fashion, he believed that braking to evaluate ideas could actually hinder their production. According to this principle, generating many ideas and then applying evaluation criteria is more productive than judging each idea as it is produced. The intent is not to eliminate evaluation, but simply to delay it. So one of the 4 cardinal rules of brainstorming actually prohibits judgment. So here are the 4 rules of brainstorming. And on page 275 and 276 of your text, you can read more. These are elaborated on, but simply put, number 1 is criticism is ruled out. Number 2, freewheeling is welcomed. Number 3, quantity is wanted. And number 4, combination and improvement are sought. So these 4 rules can be used in their original form or adapted for younger grade levels. One preschool teacher called brainstorming popcorn thinking. Her students were taught that when they did popcorn thinking, they should try to have lots of ideas pop out, just like popcorn in the popper. They were also taught that no one is allowed to criticize ideas during popcorn thinking, and that it's all right to use someone else's popcorn idea if you change it a little. The teacher did not find that her 3- and 4-year-olds needed any special encouragement to generate freewheeling ideas. So that just shows you a really great way that it can be adapted even for very young learners. The next one is SCAMPER, which you may have studied before in some previous education courses. SCAMPER, of course, is an acronym. We do love our acronyms in education. And SCAMPER is one that we actually see it a lot in gifted classrooms. I think it's one that it's an acronym that it's very approachable for all students, and it's one that builds alignment. So from class to class and from grade level to grade level, you don't have to reteach the concept to our students. They know what it means. So that can be very helpful. So the researcher Eberl in 77 and then revisited in 1996 actually took some of Osborne's key questions, the ones that he had used for the brainstorming model, and arranged them into an easy to remember acronym. So I'm going to go over what each of these means. And again, please visit your book. There's a lot of examples for each part of the acronym that might be very meaningful for you to better understand it. So the S stands for substitute. It suggests asking questions such as, what could I use instead? Or what other ingredients or materials or components could I use? The C stands for combine. It asks, how can I combine parts or ideas? Are there 2 things I could blend together rather than and come up with something new? The A stands for adapt. It suggests questions such as, what else is like this? Or could we change or imitate something else? M can have several meanings. It can stand for modify. In modifying, we ask, could we change a current idea, practice, or product slightly and be successful? It can also stand for magnify or minify, depending on what subject area and content we're trying to study. P stands for put to other uses. It suggests that we ask, how can I use this in a new way? So consider how the switch from advertising Kleenex as a makeup remover strategy actually to making it a pocket handkerchief was brilliant, and it made it Kleenex now, of course, we know nobody really uses it as a makeup remover, but we use it for so many other things. So put to other uses is what the P stands for. E is for eliminate. It leads us to ask what can be omitted or eliminated. Are all the parts necessary? Is it necessary to solve this problem at all? And R, the last one, stands for rearrange or reverse. It suggests questions such as, could I use a different sequence? Could I interchange parts? Could I do the opposite? And so I'll just on that last one, I want to tell you about one. It's on page 283 of your textbook, and it's one that I've actually done myself with my students, and it is fantastic. So it comes from Marilyn Singer's book called Mirror, Mirror, and it puts the reverse part of scamper. So that last one, that R, to use by creating poems that tell two different versions of fairy tales. One when read from the top down, and another when lines are read from the bottom up. It is an incredible challenge for gifted students. They love it. It's very fun for them. Challenge your students to create their own mirror poems or to try applying another scamper verb to an original or favorite poem. And then what could happen to a poem if you substituted or eliminated words or perhaps magnified or minified this. So such an unusual word, sorry, aspects of the language. So that's just an example of one that could be done. The two other examples that I want to mention to you that are very important, I'm not going to take the time, but I really want you to go look at them. Attribute listing is a fantastic strategy. It generates creative ideas by looking at the attributes of something. So it could be, for example, the attributes to be considered when trying to redesign a candy bar. Before we get into redesigning it, you break down its attributes, the filling, the size, the packaging. So it's really a wonderful analysis tool for our students. And then the last one is the 6 thinking hats. 6 thinking hats is just a fantastic tool. It's a fantastic strategy, not only for divergent thinking, but also for empathetic thinking and positional thinking, perspective thinking. So I've actually included a video at Wright that shows how thinking hats can be used in the classroom in multiple, it's actually a school level initiative, I think, if I remember correctly in this video, and it shows how it can be used in all different classrooms with different grade levels. So I think you will enjoy that one. The next thing that we're going to talk about is using metaphors and analogies. So simply put, synetics is the joining together of different and apparently irrelevant elements. And this is a wonderful way not only to build creativity within our students, but especially for gifted students, it's a really fun way to communicate with them. So there are, with metaphors and analogies, synetics is an original word that's coined, as we mentioned, the joining together of different and apparently irrelevant elements. Metaphors and analogies definitely do this. Several theories of creativity emphasize the importance of bringing together remote ideas to stimulate a new point of view or to forge a new synthesis. Among the most powerful, of course, as we talked about, metaphors and analogies. So we've got direct analogies. This is the simplest type of comparison. In a direct analogy, individuals look for parallels between one idea, object, or situation and another. Students first learning to make direct analogies start with simple comparisons between similar objects and progress to more abstract processes. Beginning comparisons are most likely to be successful if they're based on clear similarities in either form or function. Even young students likely can see physical similarities between a tree and a hat rack, or functional similarities between a campfire and a stove. Students will be most successful if they first practice describing the connections in an analogy selected by someone else before they begin to create their own. They should have opportunities to identify the connections and similarities in such activities, such as how a comb and a rake are alike, before being asked, what things are like a comb? So, first of all, what this is essentially saying is, first of all, we have to put them together for them and show them how to do it, show them how to articulate the commonalities between the two unlike things. Then we can pose those questions. What things are like a comb? Those more open-ended type of things. The next are personal analogies. For personal analogies, students are asked to be a thing. They do not physically act out the object or situation as they might in creative dramatics, which is something else that's talked about in this chapter. I don't cover it in this lecture, but you'll be reading about it in the chapter. In fact, many of the objects and situations that might be investigated through personal analogy do not easily lend themselves to dramatic interpretation. Doing a dramatic interpretation of a plant cell or a sedimentary rock would be difficult. But if students could imagine they were those things in specific situations, they could gain greater understanding and new perspectives. For example, the cell splits or the rock is subjected to increasing heat and pressure. So by asking them to experience these things, it can be a really important way for them to better understand the content. There are 4 levels involvement for a personal analogy. Number 1 is first-person description of the facts. So at this level, the person describes what is known about the object or the animal. Number 2 is first-person identification with emotion. At this point, they are reciting common emotions, but they're not presenting new insights. So they might, if in describing a porcupine, a student might say, I feel happy walking through the woods, or I feel protected by my quills. The third step is empathetic identification with a living thing. At this level, the student shows more insight into the life, feelings, and dilemmas of a porcupine. For example, it's confusing. Sometimes I like my quills and sometimes I don't. I feel safe with quills around me, but no one can come near. Even other porcupines don't come close because we might hurt each other. Wish I could take them off sometimes. And number 4, empathetic identification with a non-living object. So at the highest level of personal analogy, students are able to make the same type of empathetic connection with non-living things. They might express, for example, a plane's feeling of exhilaration on reaching the speed for takeoff, or the sadness of skis being put away for summer. So these are some really, really cool ways to think about using personal analogy. And then the last one we want to talk about is compressed conflicts. These are symbolic analogies that bring together words that express diametrically opposed ideas. Sometimes these juxtapositions can be like literal antonyms: happy, sadness, cold, heat. Other times they can express more complex yet conflicting relationships, such as a shameful hero or an independent follower. Compressed conflicts frequently have broad, abstract applications and can be applied to many varied situations. The level of abstraction they require makes compressed conflicts most appropriate for students in later elementary grades and above. They may form the basis of interesting and challenging writing projects or essays based on social studies or science content. Consider which historical figure could be considered a generous thief, or which forces in physics might be considered powerfully weak. So again, this is recommended for later elementary, but with gifted students, some of them are even capable of these high-level abstractions even earlier, even as like 2nd and 3rd grade. They may not can write clearly about them, but they can think about them, and they could even talk about them. So those just give you a few ideas. Definitely read more about those in your textbook. So now we're going to be moving on to creativity and assessment for learning. Assessment is an essential part of instruction, not something separate from instruction. We assess in order to make instruction more effective, as well as to determine what students have learned. When we assess learning, we assess to support intrinsic motivation. So all of these are not only true of instruction, but they're true of creativity. So assessment of creativity is an essential part of the instructional decision-making we used to build creativity into our learning activities, into our the very atmosphere, the discussions and strategies, the way we teach, the way our students learn. So we have to have some type of assessment in order to know if it's effective and in order to know if our goals are being accomplished. So 3 questions are going to focus our study. What kind of assessment is supportive of creativity? What would assessment for creativity look like? And then lastly, what would assessment of creativity look like? So you need to read chapter 9 to learn more about why we must consider the rationale and strategies for assessing for creativity and the assessment of creativity. Additionally, I've included a link to John Spencer's website, and this particular link that I put to the website is an article and a podcast that's focused on the topic of assessment and creativity. He raises some really great questions that I think you need to consider as a classroom teacher working directly with students, and then eventually you guys may go on to be school level leaders or district level leaders, and these are very important questions. These are very important considerations for how we assess creativity. So I've linked that here. You can just click, it's the hot link, and it's a full article, but there's also a podcast. The podcast is something wonderful to put on while you're cooking or working on your own creative pursuit, or exercising, doing something like that, day-to-day tasks. But it's really great. So let's talk a little bit about assessment for creativity. So the rationale for the assessment for creativity is building a sense of competence in our students, which is very important. We want to help our students build a growing sense of their own competence, not just because we're their cheerleaders, which we are, but in most cases, they know if they are really getting it or not getting it. If we say that they're doing well when they're not, they know it. If we say that their artwork is creative when it's not, they know it. The only way to help our students develop a sense of competence is to help them actually be competent. So it sounds simplistic, but it's actually very true. This is why, of course, we need good assessments. So we want to build that confidence, that social and emotional need that our students have to continue on their creative pursuits. And the only way to do that is to help them become competent. In so doing, we must actually have some assessment. So this is where diagnostic informative assessment comes in. Diagnostic assessment of creativity is very important. When we say creativity here, this is going hand in hand with those learning outcomes that we're going to have for our students. So diagnostic information is very important. And formative assessment is very important. We need to know with diagnostic, where are our students at any given time when we are implementing new creativity building strategies and using some of these tools. How proficient are our students in actually using them? And then formatively, we need to be able to see, are some of the changes that we're making in how we instruct our students and build their creative capacity, is it working? And so that's where that formative assessment would come in. Think about lots of different ways to do it though. Quick write, clicker system, exit cards, short quizzes, problem solving, graphic organizers, concept maps, journal entries, assignment drafts. So when we're thinking about diagnostic informative assessments, we actually need to think about a variety of creative assessments as well. If we do the same type of assessments over and over again, our students are going to learn the assessment rather than actually build their capacity for creativity. The other rationale is informational feedback. And so the important part of this is building a culture of feedback for our students. Rather than controlling feedback on creativity and intrinsic motivation, it's important for us to be able to consider the type of feedback that's appropriate for learning. Giving clear feedback is one of the most important things that we can do as teachers, whether we're thinking about learning or creativity or how they work hand in hand. Feedback gives students information about what they are doing well and not so well, and guidance on how to improve. Good feedback, and I want you to think about good academic feedback. It's based on standards students understand, and it allows them to adjust accordingly. So good feedback should be part of a classroom assessment environment in which students see constructive criticism as a good thing and understand that learning cannot occur without practice. If part of the classroom culture is to always get things right and be perfect, then if something needs improvement, it's considered wrong. If instead the classroom culture values finding and using suggestions for improvements, constantly striving for excellence, students will be able to use feedback, plan, and execute steps for improvement. And they will even begin seeking feedback, which is what we want. The characteristics that we want for assessment, good assessment, is building in both variety and choice. Variety in assessments is essential in order to provide information needed for pre-assessments, formative, and summative assessments. One of the basic principles of universal design is multiple means of expression, multiple ways for students to show what they know. Remember the CAST website that we talked about in a previous lesson, previous chapter? It's very important that we have a variety of ways for students to demonstrate their learning. And when possible, especially for gifted students, allow them to use choice. Now, we live in the world of standardization. So we know that that's not going to always be possible in every context. So realistically, we need to include both standardized methods of assessment because our students, they need to learn, especially gifted students. They will overthink standardized tests. So they need to have practice with that. But then we also need to build in opportunities for them to have choice in order to creatively express their knowledge and demonstrate their learning and skill acquisition. So one of the ways that we can make sure that we're kind of marrying their understanding of content with their expression of creativity is to use content rubrics. They have to learn and demonstrate the same type of content in every unit, but the way that they demonstrate it might be a little bit different. So in addition to giving them, the common assessment that the district's going to require, also building an opportunity for them to be creative, work on some type of project, some sort of, especially our gifted students. One of the things I always tried to build in was what we called the creative projects. And I typically would just label it whatever we were studying. I would typically give them a menu board of things that they could choose from, but I also allowed them to develop and come up with their own. And, I had a basic rubric of what it meant for them to be able to demonstrate the content that was needed through the activity. And then we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but self-assessment became a really big part of those types of assessments. So the other thing is meaningful tasks. So giving them authentic tasks with performance assessments is really important, especially for gifted students. They appreciate authentic audiences. They appreciate authentic problems that they're striving for, that they're trying to come up with solutions for. So it's very important that we integrate and evaluate multiple sources of information presented in diverse formats and media in order to address a question or solve a problem. So for younger students, a performance assessment could entail writing a short story, creating a dialogue between historical characters, or analyzing the acidity of soil samples from the schoolyard in order to recommend plantings. For older students, imagine that students perhaps are studying the Cold War. Students could undertake an oral history project in which they interviewed older relatives and friends about their memories of key events. So maybe the launching of Sputnik, the fall of the Berlin Wall. I recently had someone interview me about Y2K. If you don't know what that is, please look it up. It definitely made me feel old. They could integrate material from the interviews with information that they gather from print and online resources to create an original product, a brochure, some type of presentation, or even some type of maybe gallery exhibit. So these are ways that they can have meaningful tasks. We've talked about performance assessments a little bit with this. We're going to talk a little bit about self-assessments. Make sure you read the chapter 9, which talks about self-assessments. So it's very important that we give our students clear rubrics and guidelines and expectations. But when they are being creative, it's really important that they learn to self-assess. They need to calibrate. Gifted students can be extremely hard on themselves. And so this is a way that we can help them refine that criteria. If gifted students are around other gifted students, for the majority of their school experience, they may have slightly skewed perceptions of how intelligent they are or how creative they are, because they're constantly comparing themselves to other gifted students. The inverse is also true. For gifted students that they may be only a handful of gifted in their schools, then they may not have a very accurate comparison either. They're comparing themselves to students who maybe are not quite as intelligent as them. And so the reason I say this is self-assessment is important, because as their teachers, we can help them refine their understandings of some of the criteria of what it means to be creative or to demonstrate expertise in a certain area. Eventually, we want our students to build their own rubrics. We want them to build their own instruments of assessment. Of course, that's going to take a little bit of time, but it is definitely possible. And with portfolio learning, which is the last one that we're going to talk about, we can actually include a range of these types of assessments in one body of work. I have found that gifted students really enjoy building a body of work. They enjoy building a portfolio. They like seeing their progress over time. So this can be done in any content area, and it is a really meaningful way to let our students chart their creative growth and their content knowledge acquisition growth as well. So now we want to talk about assessment of creativity. And this was going to be a fairly brief slide. We're wrapping up here, but The rationale for the assessment of creativity is we've got to have some data for planning and instruction. So it's very important that we use and consider some types of assessment because it's needed to ensure that we're using for planning, instruction, to make sure that we are not confusing, I guess that would be the best word to say, confusing creative pursuits or substituting creative pursuits for things that might be a little bit more rigorous. And this is where you want to make sure that we are, whatever we're using to build creative thinking in our students is grounded in the content, because we would be doing them a disservice if we're not grounding it and helping them become experts in whatever respective fields they choose to pursue creatively. So we've got to have assessment for that purpose. The second reason is we have to have assessment because assessments are often used for students to qualify for certain programming. For example, there are creativity assessments that are used to identify gifted students in most school districts, including our local school districts. So that's another reason why it justifies programming and funding. And then the next thing is it's sometimes used to evaluate programs and curriculum. This can be done district-wide, but you can do it yourself as well. If there's a particular program, curriculum, strategy that you've been using, is it helping your students? Are they learning more? Are they actually coming up with more original ideas? Are their essays including a wider range of creative uses of evidence without compromising their logical reasoning? So you can use it to evaluate, and then of course we can use it for broader purposes. And of course, the challenge is there's a lack of consensus. And so chapter 9 is going to discuss this a lot, but there's a lack of consensus about what creativity is, what it looks like across domains. So what it looks like in English is a little bit different than what it's going to look like in math. What it looks like in a performance art is a little bit different than what it looks like in maybe in a visual art. What it looks like in, the business world is sometimes very different than what it looks like in poetry, the literary arts. So there is a lack of consensus in the field. We also have measurement issues. So there are definite issues with the assumptions that we have about quantifying and judging creativity. And then some instrument variation. So chapter 9 is going to give you many, many, many tests that are used to measure creativity. Please check those out. They're extremely interesting. But the one that I'm going to talk about right now is called the Torrance test of creative thinking. It is by far the most popular. It's probably the most widely used test. And it is one that is definitely used within our state and nationally in order to identify gifted students. It typically is going to be part of a matrix that's used to identify students. It's not the only thing, but it's typically part of it. So the open-ended nature of the tasks and the multiple dimensions in the Torrance test makes scoring it very time-consuming. And it has high interrelator reliability, but there is a discrepancy because they recommend that, for example, if there's like a battery of tests, that one person, grade all of them, because there's some discrepancy in, they will rate them all the same, but they're going to put different values on each one. So I've included a link here to the video. It's about 12 minutes and it goes into great detail about the Torrance test. I really recommend that you watch it. Not only does it help you understand how creativity is actually assessed and creative the testing part of it, but it also, you will be able to understand the thinking of some of our students, the way that they express themselves, especially gifted students. It's not their type of creativity is not going to always show up on, a regular standardized test, such as ACT or LEAP or things like that. And the Torrance test is pretty interesting for that. So definitely check it out when you get a chance. And we have some closing thoughts here. Implementing creative thinking tools and appropriately testing creativity will support your efforts to build more creative classroom environments. So that's what we wanted to do with this lesson, was reflect on what are some actual teaching tools, some strategies that we can use to build creativity. And then I wanted you to begin thinking about how it's assessed. As a classroom teacher, you're not going to have any control over how your gifted students' creativity is assessed. However, within your classroom, you want to consider how you and your students will begin to assess your own creative processes and your own creative thinking. As you continue your personal creative pursuit, so check out discussion board 3 for that, consider how you may use some of the creative thinking tools from this lesson to support your pursuit. Also, consider how you will evaluate your pursuit at the end of the semester. Carefully read chapters 8 and 9 of Creativity in the Classroom. I basically just hit the highlights for you and some key takeaways that I wanted you to have from the class. And then make sure you complete your assignments on Moodle. Please reach out if you have any questions as you move through this material and your assignments. And then here are the references for this particular lesson. Please make sure to visit Moodle so that you can access this. It's going to be the raw slide deck so that you can access all the links to the videos. Have a wonderful week.